Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're heading to Angkor Wat, a place you probably picture, with those iconic towers.
Instantly recognizable.
Exactly. But we're looking beyond just the temple. We're digging into this extraordinary, almost hidden civilization that really mastered a tough environment.
Right. And the big question, the mystery we're tackling is how? How did this huge empire, maybe 1 million people, build all this? And what went wrong in the end?
It's an amazing story.
Yeah.
And this deep dive, it's all about their water engineering, this incredible hydrological system they built.
Yeah, we'll get into the science, the construction, and how new tech like LIDAR has just blown the doors off our understanding of how big it really was.
And the new questions that raises, too.
Definitely. And there's this fascinating twist, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. This water system, this absolute marvel, it was also its biggest weakness. Sort of the seed of its own downfall, baked right in.
Paradoxical, really.
So to get this, we need the setting. Picture Cambodia, these vast, flat, lowland plains.
Yep.
And the climate. Well, it's intense. You've got this really strong monsoon.
A real challenge. Two sides to it.
Exactly. May to October, serious flooding. Like 150 centimeters of rain, that's, 5 feet?
Something like that, yeah. Massive amounts of water.
Then the rest of the year. Bone dry. Arid conditions.
So too much water, then not nearly enough.
That's the puzzle they had to solve.
And what's so striking, I think, is that this wasn't just something to, deal with. This extreme climate, the wet and dry, it actually pushed them.
Pushed them how?
It drove their innovation. It forced them to develop this incredibly sophisticated water engineering. It wasn't just clever building, it was survival.
A core strategy.
Absolutely. It underpinned the whole Khmer Empire. They really got their local hydrology, and they adapted. Turned a massive challenge into a strength.
And what an adaptation, this network they built. It's just staggering. Canals, moats, embankments, and these huge artificial lakes, reservoirs. The berets.
Right, the berets are key.
And the scale. We're talking maybe 1,000, even 1,500 square kilometers. Mostly built by hand, just earth moved by people.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? The sheer organization needed.
What does that tell us? Mobilizing that kind of labor.
It points to a very powerful, centralized state, no question,
Right.
able to coordinate these massive projects over centuries.
Wow.
And the berets, they were like the heart of it. Giant water batteries, essentially.
Water batteries, I like that.
There were 4 major ones. The West Beret is the biggest and kind of amazing. Built early 11th century. It's huge, 8 kilometers by about 2 kilometers.
That's enormous.
16 square kilometers of surface area. Held something like 53 million cubic meters of water. And incredibly, it's the only one still holding water today.
Still today.
Wow.
And what did they do?
Lots of things. Stored that monsoon rainwater for the dry season, obviously. Irrigation for crops, flood control, even helped recharge the groundwater.
Yeah.
Multifunctional.
Okay, so the berets are massive storage. What about moving the water, the canals?
Just as impressive in their own way. A whole network. Some canals were over 20 kilometers long.
20 kilometers.
And wide, too, 40 to 60 meters across in places.
Right.
And they moved water, but also crucial for transport. Think about building Angkor Wat, those huge sandstone blocks.
They came from quarries far away, right?
Exactly. They floated them on barges through these canals. Imagine moving multi-ton stones on water. Like you said, getting a sofa through a door is hard enough.
Right. Incredible logistics.
It really was. And then you've got the moats around the temples. Angkor Wat's is famous.
Huge. Almost 200 meters wide.
190 meters, yeah. And long, 1.5 kilometers east-west, 1.3 north-south. But here's where it gets really interesting scientifically.
Okay.
We used to think they were just defensive, keep people out. Or maybe symbolic, like the cosmic ocean in Hindu mythology.
Seems plausible.
But the newer understanding is that they had this vital, practical job, keeping the temples standing.
How does a moat do that?
It's about the foundations. Angkor is built on sandy soil. The moat maintained a consistent groundwater level underneath.
Ah, okay.
So the sand wouldn't dry out and shift or get totally waterlogged and unstable. Either way, it would wreck the foundations over time. The moat stabilized everything.
Wow. So practical engineering, hidden in plain sight, form and function perfectly merged.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the grand scale stuff. They had smaller ponds too, trappings for villages or even households.
So a whole system, top to bottom.
Yeah, state projects integrated with local water management. Very sophisticated thinking. Water was just part of the fabric of life and planning.
And how they built it. You said mostly earth.
Right. Pragmatism again.
Mhm.
Earth was cheap, available, flexible. They saved the expensive, difficult stone for where it really mattered in the water system.
Like what?
Critical points. Spillways to handle overflow safely, culverts, channels under pathways, things that took the brunt of the water's force.
Smart. Not just building big, building clever.
Very clever. It shows a really deliberate engineering approach.
Wow.
Maximize your resources for function.
Did they have specific techniques that show, like, advanced knowledge for the time?
Oh, absolutely. Take the Bampan Reach spillway. It dates back to the 9th century.
Okay.
They built it following the natural curve of the water flow. Why? To reduce turbulence and stop erosion downstream.
That's pretty advanced thinking for the 9th century.
It is, and they used interlocking blocks of laterite, that's a local iron-rich rock.
Right, you see it everywhere there.
And these blocks had grooves, vertical and horizontal, to lock them together tightly against the force of floodwaters. Really quite precise,
Amazing.
if you connect that up. It shows they really understood hydraulic forces, fluid dynamics, not from textbooks, obviously, but deep empirical knowledge passed down.
Learned by doing over generations.
Exactly. And those canal bridges you sometimes see, they were often multifunctional too.
How so?
Designed with tall, narrow arches, so yes, a bridge. But they could also function as weirs to control water level, locks for boats, even parts of dams.
All in one structure. Wow.
Yeah, real mastery of hydraulic and civil engineering allowed them to manage those intense monsoon flows. And again, back to the temple's understanding soil mechanics, using wet sand, using the moats for stability. It's an integrated knowledge base.
So all this engineering, it changes how we view Angkor, doesn't it? There was that old debate, the hydraulic city idea. Was it symbolic, or did it actually work to support people?
Right, that debate went on for a long time. Was it all ritual or practical?
And what's the verdict now with modern archaeology?
Well, what's fascinating is the new data confirms it could work. The system was technically capable of irrigating huge areas of rice fields, feeding and watering a massive population.
So functional wins out.
The consensus now leans heavily towards functional, yes, but likely multifaceted. It probably served practical needs, flood control, irrigation alongside maybe ritual or symbolic ones. It's not necessarily either.
And a lot of this new clarity comes from LIDAR.
LIDAR has been the real game changer here,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, remind us quickly. LIDAR is?
Light detection and ranging. Basically, you fly over an area, bounce laser beams off the ground, and create a super precise map of the surface elevation.
Even under trees.
That's the magic. It penetrates the vegetation canopy. So in a place like Angkor, covered in jungle, it lets you see the ground features hidden underneath. Old walls, canals, house mounds.
Things invisible for centuries.
Exactly. There was a big survey in 2012, the KALC project, covered 370 square kilometers around Angkor. The results were just revolutionary.
What did it show?
It showed an entire city we never knew existed, not just a few new bits, a whole formally planned urban landscape linking the big temples like Angkor Wat into a much wider network.
How much bigger?
The known urban core went from about 9 square kilometers to at least 35, but it wasn't dense like, say, medieval London.
No.
No, it was more like a low-density urban landscape, or maybe a megacity, as some call it now. Houses, ponds, canals, temples, fields, all interconnected by that water network. It was the glue holding it together.
A water city.
And
And LIDAR helped estimate population, too.
hugely, because it could map all these small features like household ponds or cisterns. Over 3,000 of them were mapped.
3,000. Hidden by jungle.
Completely hidden. And mapping those gives you a much better idea of where people lived and how many. The estimates jump dramatically.
To what?
We're now talking maybe 750,000, possibly up to 1 million people.
1 million people.
Okay.
In a pre-industrial city, that's staggering.
It really is. Changes the whole picture of urbanization back then.
And did LIDAR reveal stuff beyond the main Angkor area?
Yes, definitely. Using specific processing techniques like LRM, that's local relief modeling, it helps highlight subtle man-made bumps and dips.
Okay.
They found extensive rice field networks and water systems at other Khmer sites too, like Kokur and Phom Kulen, places also covered in forest.
So more evidence for large-scale functional water management.
Exactly. It really strengthens the case that this water engineering was essential for supporting that vast population.
Okay, so we have this picture of incredible ingenuity, massive scale, a system that worked for centuries, but then the decline.
Right. And here's the paradox we mentioned. That very complexity, that impressive system, it eventually became a major vulnerability.
How does something so sophisticated fail? That's the big question, isn't it?
It seems it got hit by a kind of double whammy: climate problems and problems inherent in the system itself.
Climate problems. Like what?
We know from things like tree ring studies and lake sediment cores, paleoclimate data, that the later period of Angkor, say 14th, early 15th centuries, saw extreme climate swings.
Like extremes how?
Really severe, long droughts lasting decades. But also, interspersed with those, unusually intense monsoons, much bigger floods than usual.
So whipsawing between too dry and too wet.
Exactly. And the system, massive as it was, seemed pushed beyond its limits. Droughts would empty reservoirs, lower water tables, then mega floods would damage the canals, dump huge amounts of silt.
Clogging everything up.
Precisely. A really vicious cycle.
And you mentioned flaws in the system itself.
Yeah, it seems so. For instance, those long, straight, man-made canals, unlike natural rivers that meander.
Right, they slow the water down.
Exactly. Straight canals mean faster water flow, which means more power to erode the canal beds and banks.
Leading to more silt downstream.
Yes. And then add large-scale farming, especially if they were using slash and burn or swidden agriculture nearby.
That leaves the soil bare, right?
Ooh.
Easily washed away.
Very easily. So more sediment running off the land into the canals and reservoirs during those intense rains, clogging them up even faster.
An environmental feedback loop, basically. Their actions made the climate impact worse?
Seems like it. And just maintaining this massive system must have taken incredible resources, constant effort. Some researchers think it was maybe always a bit fragile, always needing huge inputs to keep it working. Problematic from its inception is a phrase sometimes used.
So the climate punches, the system's own weaknesses. It starts to crumble.
And that crumbling has huge knock-on effects. The water system fails, so rice harvests fail.
Food shortages.
Right. And maybe just as important, it potentially undermined the king's authority.
How?
A key part of Khmer kingship was the idea that the king ensured prosperity, controlled the waters, maybe even had supernatural connections to it. If the system fails, if there's drought and flood.
People lose faith. The king looks weak.
Potentially, yes. So it's likely a major factor in the decline and the eventual shift of the capital away from Angkor down to Phnom Penh.
Probably not the only factor.
Oh, almost certainly not. There were likely geopolitical pressures, maybe economic shifts, changes in religious focus too. It's complex. But the water system failure looks like a really significant piece of the puzzle.
So LIDAR solved the mystery of Angkor's true scale, this hidden megacity. But it sounds like it also raised new questions.
Absolutely. That's often how science works, isn't it? Answers lead to more questions.
Like what? What are the big unknowns now?
Well, for one, just because the system could irrigate vast areas, we still don't know for sure how much of that potential was actually realized consistently through history.
Ah, okay. Did they farm all of it all the time? Or did it vary?
Exactly. Then there's the detailed timeline. This system wasn't built overnight. It grew and changed over centuries, pinning down exactly when each canal, each beret was built, modified, maybe fell out of use. That's still a huge, complex task.
Getting that finer-grained picture of its evolution.
Right, and also understanding the local level better. How did the small village ponds, the trapiangs, connect with the huge state-run canals? How did individual farmers manage their water within this giant framework? We need more detail on that ground level.
Lots still hidden even after LIDAR. What stands out to you most about those remaining mysteries?
For me, it's probably that question of realization versus potential. Knowing how much food they actually produced, how consistently, would tell us so much about the resilience and maybe the stresses within the society year to year, century to century.
Yeah, that makes sense. So wrapping up, Angkor's story is this incredible paradox, isn't it?
Absolutely. This stunning feat of engineering, this water metropolis thriving against the odds for centuries.
But also a really potent cautionary tale. How that same complexity, that reshaping of the environment, ultimately made it vulnerable, especially when the climate turned extreme.
And the lessons for us today are pretty stark, I think.
How so?
Well, think about it. Managing water scarcity and floods, dealing with siltation from land use, the social impact when large infrastructure fails. These are exactly the kinds of challenges we face globally now with climate change.
Right. Angkor dealt with this centuries ago.
Exactly. It's a powerful historical case study for modern water management, for thinking about the long-term consequences of our own massive interventions in the environment. Even the smartest solutions can have unforeseen downsides down the line.
A sobering thought. So, maybe the final question for you, our listeners, to ponder. Given Angkor's complex, interwoven, and ultimately fragile bond with water, What should we be thinking about most carefully today as we build and manage our own large-scale systems facing an uncertain climate future?
What are the vulnerabilities we might be building in right now?
Something to think about. Join us next time for another deep dive.